told you guys that celiac disease is an issue with digestion of gluten, and that's an autoimmune condition where you react to gluten, and that my brother had celiac disease, and I thought it would be most helpful if he joined me to tell us a little bit about his experience having celiac disease. So, Mike, do you just want to introduce yourself and our special guest?
Hi, I'm Mike Pope. I'm Lizzie's brother, and this is our puppy, Cheddar. He's a corgi puppy. He's about 3.5 months old and turning into a big chubby dog. And he's very excited to be here. So
He's very cute.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, both of you. Cheddar also adheres to a gluten-free diet.
That is true. Yeah, one of the things to help make it easier for me to manage, it's easy for me to limit the gluten that comes into our house. And so everyone who lives here, including Cheddar and my girlfriend Lauren, we all are gluten-free in the house. So that makes our lives just a little easier.
Yeah, because Lauren will eat gluten, like if she's out at a restaurant, she might eat something.
Yeah, so she can eat gluten wherever she wants outside of the house. But
yeah. Well, that's a good point, because I told, in earlier in the video I mentioned that this treatment for celiac is that you don't eat gluten.
Right.
But I think that there's a little bit more to it than people think, because at first it seems like that, okay, I can easily do that. But do you want to talk a little bit about some of the adjustments you have to make both in your house and then when you're out to eat?
Yeah.
Or if you want to go out to eat?
Definitely. So I was diagnosed in October of 2018, so it's almost 2 years ago now. And like you were saying, when I first got diagnosed, it seemed like, okay, I know what celiac disease is. I know it means I can't eat gluten. Like, good thing there's tons of gluten-free foods. This is kind of easy. But the reality as you start to get deeper into managing the disease is that it's not just about eating foods that are labeled gluten-free. It's about making sure that any traces of gluten stay out of your diet. So within a house, it means looking at the pots and pans that you cook with. It means looking at the labels a little more closely. So something that is labeled as gluten-free might actually be made in a facility that still handles wheat and gluten. And those products are more questionable for someone with celiac disease. And so it's...
Are you talking about when the manufacturer just says gluten-free on their package versus when they have the gluten-free seal from the FDA?
Right. So there's a few different certifications that come with gluten-free. And so there's things that are certified gluten-free, and that means they have a certain level of testing that's done to the product that puts it below a certain threshold of gluten that's present. You'll never find something... Very rarely are processed foods completely gluten-free, but they can be very low testing or tested to the lowest possible amount. And so that's something that's certified gluten-free. But there's also a level that's just gluten-free. And that's the FDA's sort of level that says, I think it's below 20 parts per million, that says, so this is technically gluten-free. But those manufacturers don't necessarily always test the product. And it doesn't mean that it's on a gluten-free line. So they can have other products that use gluten that are made in the same facility. And one of the risks with celiac is something called cross-contact, where something that is technically gluten-free comes in contact with something that has gluten and then can result in a reaction in someone like me who has celiac disease.
So this could be like if you make ice cream and you're making a vanilla ice cream, which should be gluten-free probably,
right,
but you make it on the same line as your cookies and cream ice cream.
Exactly. So that's one of the things, I love ice cream and I love Ben & Jerry's, but I don't eat Ben & Jerry's anymore because even though they have some plain flavors, their flavors aren't guaranteed to be gluten-free because they're all made in the same facility and on the same line.
Is there a brand that is gluten-free or that you trust more? I know you make your own.
Some that are more trustworthy than others. I think Breyers has some that are gluten-free, and then Talenti gelato is usually trusted, but they also have flavors that have chunks and things like that. It is really tough. I mean, I think that's one of the challenges of being in the celiac world is deciding what your level of risk is and what you're comfortable with. And so it often comes down to knowing the companies and knowing the sourcing. And so there's been some companies that I've seen that they say, okay, it's labeled gluten-free. I'm going to reach out to this company to learn a little bit more about how they produce and understand, do they produce it in a gluten-free facility or is it in a mixed facility or what? And so understanding from them directly what their process is, because some people don't go through the expense of getting certified for being gluten-free, but their products are still safe. So it's a balance. So there's a lot of research that goes into being a celiac patient and trying to manage that. When we first started, we had to clear out all of our pots and pans and get new cutting boards and a new toaster, because those are things that you don't really think about, but every time you put a piece of bread in a toaster, it's leaving those little crumbs behind. And if you've been eating gluten your whole life and you've been using a gluten bread in a toaster, now it could then put those crumbs onto your gluten-free bread and still cause problems for you. So, it's things from that all the way through the process. So if we go out for dinner and Lauren gets a delicious gluten-filled fried chicken sandwich or something, we have to wait until we get home. She can brush her teeth and clear out any gluten from her before we can really interact closely. So it's sort of a crazy thing that you never would have thought about, but you have to be a little bit more careful of.
Yeah, totally. It's definitely a lot of vigilance. And we've talked a little bit how manufacturers have to have their contact information on the food label. And I know you are very internet savvy, but it's important that the manufacturer has their contact information for people like you or with other allergies that do want to get more information about product production. So that's like why the food label has to have that.
And some companies are really good about it. You'll go to their website and they'll have their list of what they consider to be their gluten-free options. So like Frito-Lay, they have a whole set of products that they consider to be gluten-free, but they don't always label them as such in the store, but they have an updated list that they continually update with their new products. And they're one of those companies that I trust, but I wouldn't pick their product over a certified gluten-free product. So when it comes to chips, I love, Keppel brand potato chips because they're certified gluten-free and I know they're safe. Or Green Mountain Gringo tortilla chips. Those are certified gluten-free. I know they're safe. And, other options are probably safe too, but because they're certified, I feel a lot more comfortable eating those.
Yeah, that's a good example because most people would think that chips would be no problem. They're gluten-free because they're made from potatoes. Nice cheddar potatoes, but just thinking about having that certification is like an extra level of peace of mind.
Yes.
Bye, Cheddar.
All right, he was getting a little antsy. He wanted to sit down. So I think the certification is really helpful to giving you the peace of mind and knowing that a company takes it seriously enough that they're going to do the testing and the cleaning and the processing that's necessary. I think one of the things that's sort of interesting is with FDA labeling and food labeling, there's no requirement for a company to say that their product is produced in a mixed facility. And so there's plenty of products that say they're gluten-free, but don't have a warning that says, this product was produced in a facility that also handles wheat. And you don't know unless you reach out. And so to the credit of those companies that, even though they are trying to make a gluten-free claim, they still will put that warning. That's a nice thing for those of us who are in the celiac world because it gives us the knowledge that we need to know, what foods are safe and not. And so I think that's one of those labels that is really helpful and that I think I would love to see more of on foods.
It is surprising that they don't have to do that because they have to label with other allergens like milk and nuts, for example. So it is surprising they don't have to say that they're made in a facility that also processes wheat. It wouldn't be that hard to add.
Yeah, interesting.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you felt before you got diagnosed? Like what prompted your doctor to test you for celiac disease?
Yeah, so it was the summer of 2018. I was sort of just going about my normal business, and every few weeks my stomach just sort of felt off. Wasn't terrible. I wasn't, doubled over in pain. I just felt off. And it was that feeling of there's something wrong. I'm not sure quite what it is, but there's something. And so I went to my doctor and he said, well, it could be stress. It could be a few other things. We can't test for stress. We can test for a few other things. Let's test for those and see what happens. So we did, a first round of sort of basic diagnostic tests of things. Nothing popped up. He said, well, let's wait and see. Maybe it is just, you're worked up. Let's see how things go over the next couple of months. And as I went, I'm a teacher, so as I went back to school in the fall, I was still feeling that that weirdness every so often. And so I went back to my doctor and said, okay, well, if it's not what we've already tested for, it potentially could be celiac disease. And, we hadn't really talked about that between him and I before, because it didn't seem food-based to me. I was eating pizza, I was eating sandwiches every day, and it wasn't a daily occurrence. So I sort of, you don't really think it's related to the things you're eating until you can look back on some of the triggering events and sort of say, oh, well, maybe that was a connection there. So we tested for celiac disease. There's a blood test they do first to check your the levels of how you are absorbing gluten. Once that becomes positive, they then have you do an endoscopy to go down and check your intestine, because what happens with celiac disease is that your body reacts to gluten and attacks it, but it ends up attacking your intestine and damaging the lining of your intestine so that it can't properly absorb nutrients. And so they go and check and see there's these little finger-like villi in your intestine.
The microvilli, we are familiar.
So they go and see whether those are nice and full or whether they've been worn down by the attacks of gluten in your body. And so when they see that, that's when they can fully diagnose you as being celiac positive. So
it's the blood test, and then for confirmation, you have to have an endoscopy.
Yep.
And you have to be eating gluten before you get these tests. If you go on a gluten-free diet before, the tests will come back as if you don't have celiac disease. So if you suspect that you need to talk to your doctor, but you need to keep eating gluten until you've had the tests.
Right. So
that's a
enjoy
mistake
those pizzas while you can. Enjoy your sandwiches while you can, because it will all change after you're diagnosed.
In fact, I think your doctor even said to you, once you got your diagnosis, like, you can have one more week to say goodbye to all these.
Have your last meal, and then time to stop. I think one of the sad things for me is I got diagnosed. It was a professional development day at school, and I was at one of our neighboring schools for lunch that day, and I never eat school lunch except for on professional development days, and so I ate the school lunch, which was some not very good, like, turkey stew thing, and then I got the call that afternoon that I had celiac, and so I had to stop eating gluten, and that was my last gluten meal, was this terrible school lunch, which was really a disappointment.
Out of all the foods you loved.
Yeah, a tough way to go out.
Yes,
so.
That's tragic. But that brings us to the point that you've actually done a really good job of figuring out foods that you can eat, that you do like to eat, and like replacing, because your favorite foods, if I think about them, if I had to say, would be like burgers, pizza, those type of things, which are full of gluten.
Right.
And you've done a good job figuring out how to replace them.
Yeah, that's been one of the challenges, is to either find places that you think are safe to eat a version of that. So, there's places like Bliss Bee, which is in Williston and South Burlington, that serves fried chicken, but they have gluten-free buns, and all their food is gluten-free, especially if you ask for it. And so it's fine.
And just because the owner's wife is celiac, I believe.
Right. And so that's one of those things you find is, as you start looking, there's apps and things that can help you find locations where you can eat. And oftentimes those ones that are well regarded as being safe for celiac, the chef or the owner has some tie to the disease. So it's their child has it, they have it, their family has it. And that helps drive them to it, because it is something that most chefs don't really have to think about that much. And if you're not considering it as part of your meals, it's not a big deal. But yeah, and then for me, it's also figuring out how to make my own versions of things that I like. So when I first got diagnosed, I spent a lot of time eating the frozen gluten-free pizzas, which just aren't great. They're not pizza. They're fine, but they're not pizza.
Right, they're different.
And it became sort of my quest to find real good gluten-free pizza, which is hard in Vermont. There's not that many options. And so I found a book that taught me how to make great gluten-free pizzas. And now I can sort of enjoy that, but it takes some work on my end. It's not as easy as just calling Domino's and saying, hey, can I have your gluten-free pizza? I would never trust a gluten-free pizza from Domino's. It's just
no, because they're made in a hugely glutinous environment.
Right.
And that's really like the point that I want to make clear to people, is like, that's the level of difficulty, is just because like the food itself might be gluten-free. If it's made in a gluten-y environment, it's very likely to have enough contamination that it will bother someone with celiac disease, even if they don't feel it, which it could still be doing damage. So that's a tough thing for people with celiac. And you're right, everybody with celiac has different levels of comfort. And I would say that you've been really good about being strict with yourself. And some people are, they'll eat cheese off of a cracker plate that has glutinous crackers. So we have a spectrum, as we do with many things in life with celiac, but I think that you've done so much work on figuring out like ways to make your favorite foods still very enjoyable.
Yeah, and I think, for me, one of the things I was lucky about when I got diagnosed is that my own doctor, turned out he had celiac himself. And so that was, I think, lucky in many ways. One, because it made him more aware of the disease and more likely to test me for it. That's one of the big issues for folks with celiac. For folks with celiac, is they're often underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed at first. Because it's hard to pinpoint what it is you're feeling. So I was lucky that he had celiac because it helped him diagnose it, but then it also helped him guide me through. And so one of the things that he's been saying to me more in the last year is that, yes, you do need to have a strict gluten-free diet, but it should not come at the expense of your own mental health of trying to work your way through the world. Because it's really stressful when you go to a grocery store and you have to look at every single label. You have to think about every single thing you're going to buy. Or you go to a restaurant and you have to wonder, is this place safe for me or not? And so one of the things that he's really tuned into is sort of the research on celiac and what the people who study it every day are saying, which is, yes, you got to avoid gluten, but a small amount of gluten once is not going to cause permanent damage down the line. And so you might not feel great that day, but you don't need to worry about it being the gateway to some bigger disease.
Yeah, that's huge, because otherwise you're already not feeling good perhaps, and then you just like add the stress of like, oh gosh, have I done real damage? And then you're really not going to feel good. And we know there's such a connection between your gut and your brain.
Right.
It's the second you start feeling like, oh gosh, it just reinforces.
And that's the other thing for people with celiac is he says, if you're feeling that rumble in your stomach, don't always jump immediately to, oh, I must have been gluten. There are other things that happen to anyone that might be causing that distress. And so freeing yourself a little bit from getting locked into, oh my gosh, I'm having a...
You've traveled with celiac now, but I will say like one of the happiest times I've seen you during the first year you had it was when we were at our other brother's wedding, and it was in California, and there was a gluten-free bakery that was like entirely gluten-free, professional bakery, really nice. And you went there every day we were there.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, is being able to take advantage of that sort of spot. Is like, okay, I'm going to go there for lunch every day that I can. I'm going to go there and take out the baked goods that I can, because it's harder to find those little treats that are, when you're walking through your normal life, you can pop into any bakery and be like, oh, here's a great croissant I'm going to enjoy. But when you have celiac, it limits those options, and you have to really think about where you can get those treats. And so it's nice to take advantage of those when you can.
Yeah, for sure. And it's also interesting, like, why those places exist in a place like California. I think probably a lot of it is just that of the fad diet of gluten-free has caused some of these places to pop up, but then they benefit people with celiac. But I was also wondering, like, do you get annoyed with people that are like, I'm eating gluten-free for weight loss?
Yeah.
Or are you like, okay, fine?
It is a double-edged sword. It's great because the increased awareness of gluten and gluten-free has led to a lot more options. And, I think I've said this many times, but this is a great time to have celiac disease. If you're going to have it, this time in history is a pretty good time to have it, because there's so many options. But on the flip side, it means there are more companies and places that are trying to take advantage of that claim and aren't necessarily being as honest and upright or forthright with what's in their foods, or actually making good quality gluten-free food. Because you can make plenty of things gluten-free, but the actual nutritional value of that food is probably pretty questionable in a lot of cases. So again, it's about reading those labels and making sure that you're getting something that doesn't have a ton of fillers or other things that just aren't that great for you nutritionally.
Yeah, that's what I was saying in my intro for this, is like, there's no reason for people that don't have celiac or an actual gluten allergy to be eating gluten-free. Like, the fact that it's become something for weight loss is just because originally your foods were so restricted. If you were gluten-free, you were cutting out so many foods. You would, of course, have lost weight. And you lost weight when you were adjusting to it as well. And people with celiac often lose weight before they're diagnosed because they're not digesting very well.
Yeah, it's an interesting trend, because there are a lot of people who lose weight, as you said before, because they're not properly absorbing nutrition. And then in my case, I lost a lot of weight after. I think in part because I was doing a better job digesting. But really, probably the big reason is that I was just not eating as many of those easy to grab snacks. So every time I go into the teacher's lounge and there's a new set of baked goods, I no longer can eat those. So it's like, oh, well, I guess I don't have to worry about eating that. Or when you go to a party and you just can't eat all the little snacks, that really helped me sort of cut back. And now it sort of has leveled off back at a healthy level. Which is good because you
didn't want to lose weight indefinitely.
Right. And so.
And then also, like, if, as you were saying, a lot of the gluten-free products, especially if they're not of high quality, they are made of flours and substances that are just not nutritionally dense. They don't have fiber, they don't have vitamins, minerals. So in terms of people being like, it's healthier to eat gluten-free, it's really only healthier to eat gluten-free if you have celiac disease, if you have a gluten allergy, or if you're going to really read labels. But for those of us who can eat gluten, I feel like it's almost insulting not to.
Yeah, well, I think, one of the things that I have to be aware of, and I just had my annual physical a month ago, is my own nutritional levels. And so making sure that my vitamins and minerals are at the right level, because you miss out on some of those things that you normally get in a gluten-filled diet. So that's one of the things that our doctor tests on, is doing a blood test to make sure you're at the right levels and just making sure that you're getting a well-rounded diet. And the truth is, you can do a gluten-free diet using really good just whole foods. You can get fruits and vegetables and meat are all naturally gluten-free, and so if you lean into those, that helps a lot to keep you on the good track.
Yes, for sure. Plus then you figure out your other compound foods and whatnot. Yeah, it's so interesting to talk to you, because I feel like you've navigated so well. Like, you're at a way more comfortable place than you were at 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, almost 2 years ago. So I feel like if anybody in the class just got diagnosed with celiac, like, it does get easier.
Yeah.
It is probably very difficult to deal with in college. I would say it's lucky you didn't have it then.
Yeah.
Or at least you didn't know you had it.
Right.
So hearts go out to, like, dealing in the dining halls for sure.
Yeah. And I think that is the challenge, is finding those ways to get your meals. And we found there's a gluten-free meal kit service that we use that's certified gluten-free. And so it shows up once a week. It gives us free meals that we can make, gives us the ingredients for those meals. And we feel pretty safe with the stuff that comes, because they are supposed to be certified gluten-free. It has been interesting in the last few months because of the pandemic. There's been some times where they've substituted ingredients from their sister company, which isn't certified gluten-free, and they haven't warned us. So that sort of, again, it's that labeling moment of having to be really cognizant of, wait, this doesn't have the same label as my normal one. Let's check the label. Let's see where it was made. Is this safe for me to eat? And making those decisions of, are these seeds that would normally go on the salad worth it for me to risk? No, I'll just skip the seeds. We can just have the salad because we know that's safe. So finding those moments. It's
a lot of cognitive work for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
For sure.
And I've been, it's been really lucky for me that my girlfriend's been so supportive of how we go through it. And she does a lot of that work of making sure that the meals we eat is safe. And I do a lot of the grocery shopping, but she does a lot of the assembling and cooking. And so as a team, we've had to work really hard to make it through. And she's been super accommodating, which takes a big weight off of my shoulders. It's really easy for me when I know I can trust whatever she's making for me.
Yes, I would say a big shout out to Lauren, because even just like when we've been on family gatherings together and like we go gluten-free for like the week of Christmas or something, it is a big shift for people that don't normally. It's not super hard, because as you said, there's like tons of foods you can eat with no problem. Right. But it's definitely a sacrifice on her part in some ways. Yeah, and so it's a real shout out to people that are willing to do that for sure. Yeah. But also she wants you to be healthy. And that it's like she loves you. So there's really there's not a choice. And having gluten and non-gluten people in the same house that have to be that strict is quite difficult. I know people that do it, but it's very hard.
Yeah, it's especially for us when it is just the two of us, it's not really worth the battle. I know there's, I think, my doctor has a family, and so for him, it's harder for him to try to keep everyone gluten-free, but
if you have kids, it's harder, and you might not want them to be gluten-free, perhaps. I mean, you might, it just depends. And I was going to say something about that, but.
Well, I mean, I think that is one of the interesting things with celiac is that it's hereditary, and so there is a genetic component to it. And so if you are related to someone who has celiac disease, there's a far greater chance that you may develop it later on as well. And the thing with celiac is it can happen at any time. The current sort of theory in the research is that it's triggered by an unrelated virus. You get some virus, and there's a few that they're looking at that might be the triggers, and then that unlocks the gene that you already are predisposed to having celiac, and then you have it for your life. So
yeah,
that's
the case with a bunch of autoimmune disorders.
Yeah, so it's important if you are diagnosed, or if you know someone who has celiac, or related to someone who has celiac, that if you're related to them, get tested yourself. You can do the blood test pretty easily and just check whether you are at risk.
Yeah, so everybody in our family got tested once you got, well, I don't know if Dad ever did.
Who knows? Probably.
It's impossible to know if he ever did. He really should have. But everybody got tested when you got diagnosed, and so far nobody has it, but that could change at any time. So as you told us, like, we should be getting tested periodically, not every month, but like every year or so, probably, to just check in and make sure that we haven't had a triggering event.
And there is also a genetic test you can take that would tell you whether you have the gene. If you have the gene, it doesn't mean that you'll definitely get celiac. It just means that you are more likely to. And if you don't have it, then you're all set for life, and you don't have to worry about it at all. So if you want to, go ahead and get that test, and then you know one way or the other.
Right. So, but it is a much higher percentage, especially if you have a sibling with celiac. I know I looked it up last year or 2 years ago, and I can't remember what it was, but it was a lot higher. Yeah. If you have a sibling with celiac, your odds are a lot higher. But again,
10 or something like that.
Yeah, it's still not like you're definitely going to get it, but it's just it's in your gene pool, and you have to be aware of that. And especially if you start to get symptoms, but the symptoms are so amorphous because they can be digestive like you had, but it can also be things like you can get a rash, you can get anxiety, you could have sleeplessness, irritability, the symptoms of it are wild.
Right, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's difficult for doctors to diagnose, is that if you go in with saying, I can't sleep very well, I'm feeling irritable, well, it's hard for them to think, if they're not familiar with celiac, their first thought's not going to be, oh, well, you probably have celiac disease. It's going to be more related to those sorts of symptoms. And so I think that is one of the bigger points, is to also advocate for yourself. If you suspect that it could be celiac, if you have a family member who has it, or if you just are wondering, you can also always push for that from your doctor and say, hey, I really want to get tested, just to rule it out, because at least they can go one way or the other.
The blood test is not hard, and I would say that I was convinced that I had celiac disease when I got it. Once you had it, I was like, oh, this makes perfect sense. This is why my stomach feels a little off. This is why I'm anxious. This is why I don't sleep well. I was like, I absolutely have it. No, I didn't have it at that time. Right. So you can, it can go either way. So don't be surprised if you get the blood test and it doesn't come back positive. The gut and the brain are very connected. So you can also convince yourself that you're having issues. It's an issue that people have when they go on gluten-free challenge diets, is that they say, oh, now I feel so much better. But actually the gluten wasn't bothering them. They just made a change and they wanted to feel better, so they had the placebo effect that they did feel better.
And they're often eating healthier in general, regardless of the gluten. Is they're making better choices about the foods that they eat, and that's probably helping a lot too. And the gluten is just sort of a side element of that.
To finish up our interview portion, do you want to show us your favorite gluten-free snacks that you might have in your pantry right now?
Sure, let me go look.
Okay.
All right, so I'll showcase some of my favorites. So we talked already about Kettle chips. So if you're looking for a good potato chip, Kettle's very good. They have lots of flavors, and they're all certified gluten-free, which is nice. I always wonder a little bit when they have lots of flavors, have they actually tested every single flavor? But I've never had a real issue with them, so I feel good about them.
Well, maybe they just don't use gluten ingredients. That's just a thing.
I mean, I think that's the goal, so they probably wouldn't. Green Mountain Gringo tortilla strips, delicious, and
local.
originally local. They're no longer actually local, but I still feel an
Oh, thank
affinity for them. And they are, again, certified gluten-free. Their salsa is certified gluten-free too. And that's one of those things, like finding dips, finding little extras that I love, is you do have to look a little bit deeper for that. Peanut butter. So before I was diagnosed, I used to eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches every single day for lunch. And so it felt like that was going to be a real loss. But finding a peanut butter that I trust, so this is Peanut Butter & Co. They're certified gluten-free. And so I use them. Oh, I'm going to grab one more thing. Sorry. But show you the bread that I like. So this
yes.
Canyon Bakehouse. They have lots of different varieties of gluten-free breads and buns and things like that. They can be found both in the frozen section and in the fresh bread section, or in the gluten-free section. And between that and peanut butter and jelly, it feels pretty similar to what I used to have. Not perfect, but it's pretty good. Then some more chips. These are a newer addition to our pantry, which are the Good Crisp company. Again, certified gluten-free. They're sort of like your fill-in for Pringles, which you would never guess that something like Pringles has gluten in it, but it does. And but Lay's snacks are okay, but Pringles are not. So I just go for this.
It's a good example.
Yeah. Sweet Treat, King Arthur has these gluten-free baking cups. So they're like a little mug cake, but individually packed. So they're also, again, certified gluten-free. I like a lot of King Arthur's baking mixes, so their brownies are my favorites. Their flours are good. I like those.
Yeah.
If you need your chocolate fix, if you're looking for a little more sweetness, the Endangered Species chocolate, I think all of theirs are certified gluten-free. Of course, double check, but I believe they are. Recently we found these tamales, frozen tamales.
Oh yeah,
Nissan tamale. Yeah. Again, these are sort of those quick meal moments when you get home. That's one of those annoyances when you get home and you're like, oh, I'm just gonna have a quick meal. It's a lot harder when you have to be gluten-free. So finding those things that you can pop into a freezer and pull out when you need it, and have it not be junk is nice. So I like those tamales. And then I think the last thing I have, my favorite just crackers are the Simple Mills brand crackers. They're just super,
I really like those.
Yeah, you wouldn't really know that they're not that they're gluten.
So good.
Yeah.
The cheddar ones are great, but right now I actually have 2 of them in my pantry.
Yeah.
The rosemary and the sea salt.
Yep, the sea salt's great. That was sort of the irony of when I wasn't feeling well before I got diagnosed. Is on those days I would have a piece of toast and some saltine crackers. You're like, oh, I'll just keep it really basic because I don't want to upset my stomach. When in fact, those 2 things were both bad. It would have been causing more problems than helping. So finding those stuff.
I remember. Mom was so upset because she was telling you like, oh, I feel so bad. Your stomach doesn't feel well. Just have some saltines and some toast.
Right.
And then once you got diagnosed, she was just beside herself because she had been recommending these things.
Exactly, those things those tried and true, things that just you can't do when you have celiac. So finding a substitute is because you will get stomach aches from non-celiac related things. It's good to have things you can still have that just soothe you as you're relaxing.
Well, now you have your gluten-free toast, so that's good in times of need.
Exactly.
Yeah, I will say before you got diagnosed, remember we went to that Taylor Swift concert?
Yeah, and I felt miserable.
Horrible. We stopped on the way before we left to get sandwiches, and you got like this massive sandwich.
Delicious.
It was delicious, and then it was not gluten-free.
Yeah.
And then you felt horrible like the whole way. Like we kept stopping at rest areas, and then Lauren and I would just be like waiting, and we felt so bad, but like you weren't even having really distress. You just felt so bad.
Yeah, and that was the thing.
You just had to, like,
and again,
sit on the toilet, but nothing was happening.
Right, that's the thing with celiac is it manifests in many ways. It doesn't necessarily mean, it's not sort of that stereotype of like, oh, you're going to be, on the toilet all night, it's not because things are happening, it's just because your stomach feels wrong and feels off.
Yeah.
And so it might be all sorts of different things. But yeah, and that is one of my challenges still, is that feeling of, okay, when I travel, I have to think about where I'm going. So like going to a concert, it means now I don't get to just eat the stadium food. It's now I'm gonna bring a sandwich from home. I'm gonna bring snacks from home. If I'm staying overnight, I better make sure I have enough food for the next morning or day, or I have to plan, oh, there's this bakery there I know I can go to. We'll hit that on the way home. And so, things like friends' weddings are much more challenging now. And you're like, oh yeah, I'll pull out my lunchbox while you all have your fancy meal. Here's my lunchbox with my peanut butter and jelly that I'm gonna eat. And again, I think the shift, and this is a good thing for people who are getting diagnoses, is there are a lot of social events that are food centric, or that we think are food centric. And so shifting your mindset from being, oh, I'm going to go to this party and enjoy all the snacks, to I'm going to go to this party and enjoy dancing. I'm going to go to this party and enjoy hanging out with my friends. I'm going to enjoy playing games. You have to be able to shift your mindset there. And that can work. It's hard.
I feel like we'll all just be happy to go to any events after this experience with pandemic. Yeah, I'd also say that people might be wondering, well, if you go to a wedding, like they always say on the invite card, like, do you have special needs? Like, what are your dietary restrictions? And it's still just very difficult to trust that environment. And even like at our brother's wedding in California, it was a very nice event, well planned, highly orchestrated. Right. And we went to like the black tie dinner part of it, and they knew you were gluten-free, and it was our brother's wedding. So he had like literally talked to everybody that was in charge and been like, my brother is gluten-free, do not poison him with gluten. Right. And they still brought you a plate that was not yours. Yeah,
well, and when you first got to the table, there was still a roll there at the table that wasn't gluten-free. And so again, it is those things that, you have to assess your own risk comfort and what you're comfortable with. And for me, it wasn't worth risking not feeling well for the next 3 days to just eat one fancy meal. So you have to really plan it well for yourself and decide, okay, it's easier for me just to bring a peanut butter and jelly. That's not a big deal. It's 10 minutes that I'll be looking funny while people are like, what are you eating? And then no one cares.
And also if you're just like, oh, I have celiac disease, like people are like, oh, or just, who cares? I mean, I just think we should all stop policing each other's food decisions. So, I've often been the weird one at food events. So I really sympathize with like much less reason than you have had. But I think that it's just, traveling is definitely a situation where I think it seems quite anxiety provoking.
Yeah, and I think that's
you take care of it yourself.
Right. I think that's sort of my future goal, is to continue to get more comfortable with travel and things like that, because it's something that we love to do, is to be able to go on a trip. So, for example, we go with Lauren's family, we'll go on a trip every summer for a week. We didn't go this summer for reasons, but for me, it was planning, how do I live comfortably for a week away from home? So it's finding, okay, I'm going to bring a little portable grill that I can do my own stuff on for a week. And that's all I'm going to use, is this little space. But it gives you a huge peace of mind when you're in control on your own food.
I think that was a great idea.
Yeah, but I think,
or even like when you're traveling on a plane and you can't bring a grill, it's like you would go to the grocery store, go to Whole Foods, get a hotel that has a mini fridge so that you can do a little bit of your own preparation.
Right, and I'll pack multiple loaves of this bread in my carry-on and a jar of peanut butter, and it's just a way of knowing that I'll have food I can be safe with. If I find other places that are reviewed well on the app that says this is celiac safe, then sure, I'll go there and try it. But I know I have a bag that I can use if I can't find it.
And that's a good thing about gluten-free bread, is that it lasts for quite some time.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
So you could take it on a 10-day trip, no problem.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else you want to say about celiac disease before we sign off that we haven't covered?
I don't think so. I think we've covered
a lot. And thank you so much for talking with me, so that my students could hear from like firsthand perspective rather than me saying what I think you think.
My pleasure. And if any of your students have been diagnosed or have questions and want a celiac buddy, you can feel free to plug them my way. It's good to
That's
have
so nice.
in the fight with you.
I have a lot of students, so some of them are bound to have celiac.
That's true. So if they want some insight, I'm happy to share.
Or Vermont recommendations of like restaurants that you've tested out.
Yeah,
that are safe.
for me, because I'm still learning too. I'm always happy to hear.
Yeah, that's true too. Okay, I think that's where I'll end this part. But thank you so much.